Give me liberty and give me Annette.
Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where I talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube. And if you want to see us, youtube.com/Annette Talks is the best place to find it. And I'm really excited about today's topic because it's not really being covered much in the mainstream media, but it's kind of a big deal. Israel and the UAE just reached an agreement. It's like historic and no one's talking about it. So I brought in Samuel Lourie, who is a fellow in Israel and Middle Eastern Affairs at the Centennial Institute and a Foreign Affairs fellow at the Millennial Policy Center. Try to say that twice. Samuel Lourie, thank you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Annette. It's a pleasure to be with you again, and I'm really happy to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, you were on, oh gosh, when was it? Sometime last year when we were talking about President Trump's peace deal in the Middle East, and there was so much fanfare. I watched I always forget the word. President Trump got up and announced it with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Press conference. I don't know why that escapes me sometimes. It was a fun press conference, and it was a big deal. And so you came on and we talked about it at length, and there was a whole paper that you and Jimmy Sengenberger, I always butcher that name, wrote together for the Millennial Policy Center, and I will link to it in the show notes, but it's a really great piece. And so I read it again, and I remembered our first conversation about this ambitious peace plan that President Trump was trying to negotiate between Israel and Palestine. And so I just thought, this thing is so ambitious, right? I mean, it was really impressive, but super ambitious. And here we are, how many months later? Less than a year later, I think. And we've reached a milestone that's going to get us towards this peace plan. And like, you're not hearing about it. The United Arab Emirates and Israel have just made this agreement, and it's historic, and you're not hearing about it. So tell us about it. What is this agreement about?
Yeah, so this is a really tremendous milestone, not only for the United States, but for the entire Middle East, for Israel, for the United Arab Emirates, for peace. This is the first peace treaty we've seen in the Middle East in 26 years. The last agreement was between Israel and Jordan, and then Israel also signed an agreement with Egypt back in 1979. But this is the first Gulf Arab state, and this is also the first agreement between Israel and an Arab state to push towards full normalization, which is huge because Israel has peace with Egypt and with Jordan, but there's not a lot of normalization. There's not a lot of the people going back and forth between countries, but this is going to fully normalize relations, and it's just historic for so many different reasons. So I think it's just the first step in President Trump and Senior Advisor Jared Kushner's Middle East peace plan to eventually bring a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But this is just a tremendous milestone that most of the establishment in Washington didn't think was possible, and here we are with a historic treaty brokered by President Trump. So.
And I guess we shouldn't be too surprised because the UAE is where they have that, they built the Abrahamic, is it what?
Yes.
Abrahamic Faith Center or something like that?
Yeah, Abrahamic Center.
And it's got a mosque, a church, and a synagogue, right? And so they say it's because it's all three religions that come from Abraham, right? And so I thought that in itself was remarkable when I heard that had happened. And they're also going to have an expo in Dubai that I just read today. They had to move up or back, I guess, a year because of COVID. And so it was supposed to happen this year, and Israel was going to come and have a booth there. And so that's a big deal. So all this UAE, they're obviously been moving in this direction of opening up to having a better relationship with Israel. Did I freeze up on you?
No, you're good. You're good. Okay. It's perfect.
All right. So it shouldn't have been that big of a surprise that UAE would be the first in line of these Gulf states to come along and normalize relations, because they've been, showing signs that they want to have a better relationship with their Jewish brothers and sisters, right?
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's really tremendous. The Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of Abu Dhabi, he's really been the key guy from the UAE that's really helped to broker this treaty. And he was the one that was behind the Abraham Center, having a mosque, a church, and a synagogue there in the United Arab Emirates. Actually, our friend that helped us with writing the paper that you mentioned earlier for the Millennial Policy Center, Ambassador Sam Zackham, is friends with him and the ambassador, and he sent his congratulations over to them. But yeah, they have. They've really been at the forefront of trying to, be a moderate Arab country, try to promote interreligious dialogue, and really they are one of the most influential economic business centers in the Middle East. The Wall Street Journal actually had a report that a lot of what's been happening that we're just seeing now has been going on kind of secretly for 25 plus years. There's been, for over 25 years, the Journal reported, there's been all kinds of business transactions and business deals going on between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. It's now estimated by the Tony Blair Institute that there's over $1 billion in exports from Israel to Arab countries, Arab Gulf countries specifically. So they've really, benefited and been wanting to deepen their business relations. Both sides have really wanted this. And I think it's just very fitting that this is called the Abraham Accord, that President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and the others decided to call this the Abraham Accord, because it brings together, all the children of Abraham, the Jews, the Arabs, the Christians, the Muslims. Everybody is kind of brought together through this deal. And the really exciting thing is we're probably going to see more of these deals, possibly even before year end, maybe even before the election. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is traveling to the region right now, actually, and he's meeting with leaders in Oman and Bahrain, and Sudan, who are all talking about doing peace deals with Israel. Jared Kushner and his team are going to be going to the region at the end of the week. The Associated Press reported today, and they're going to be meeting with those countries as well, and also Morocco. So there's just really this push, and all of these countries have had these negotiations and these talks going on with Israel. So I think there's kind of a gravitational pull right now for more countries to make peace with Israel. And so it's just really a historic time. And it's really, President Trump's strategy was instrumental, monumental for this. So
wow, I did not realize there were so many others that were starting to come on board. That will be tremendous if they can get one or two more countries before the election. That could make a big difference. And it's nice to have that kind of good news in 2020.
Absolutely.
This year has been a bit of a dumpster fire. And so it made me happy to hear that there was such great news coming out of the Middle East. I mean, to imagine peace in the Middle East in my lifetime would be, I just didn't think that was ever a possibility.
Right.
It looks like a real possibility now.
Absolutely.
And it's funny, I just finished reading Joel Rosenberg, his latest book. And I can't remember what it's called, but in his book, it was Saudi Arabia that decided to come to the table instead. And so I just finished reading it, found out about this, and I was like, So he just decided to go with the big country instead first, but it doesn't seem like that's very far-fetched now with all that's going on.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, and I mean, in speaking of Saudi Arabia, they're in talks with Israel about it too. I mean, it could be a little bit longer for them. Some of these other countries may come forward first. But the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, I think he, MBS as he's called here in the media, I think he's been instrumental in this push. He sat down with The Atlantic, I think it was in 2018, and basically came out and said, that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state and to live in defensible borders. I mean, that's unthinkable for, the heir to the Saudi throne to say something like that. We've never heard anything like that. There's been reports that him and Prime Minister Netanyahu have met privately. There's talks of certain business deals and military cooperations going on between Israel and Saudi Arabia. So yeah, it's very possible. And it's amazing. This is, like you said, I think it's some of the best news in 2020 that we're unfortunately not hearing that much about in the media. But hopefully, there's going to be more to come on this, a lot more to come.
So it seems like the main drivers behind us trying to broker this peace deal, number one is Iran and the threat that they are to the Gulf countries and to Israel and to the United States.
Right.
And so we basically have a common interest in keeping Iran contained. And so it seems like that's one of the main reasons why the Gulf countries are now starting to shift towards allying with Israel. And also that they see that Israel has been just wildly successful as a country. With the democracy and with their economy and all this, and then they see Palestine, who's still kind of stuck, in not a great place. They're not advancing terribly.
Right.
So, and I've been reading some pieces. I think it's out of the Gatestone website. I can't remember now, but where some of these Arab countries and some of the people in these Arab countries are actually turning on the Palestinians and saying, "Hey, Israel has a right to exist," and how some Palestinians are burning some of the flags from the UAE,
right?
And that the citizens of those countries are saying, "We don't appreciate this from the Palestinians." So you're starting to see some of these Gulf countries kind of turn on the Palestinians and saying,
"Right,
we're not really buying into your position anymore, and we think Israel has a right to exist." And so you've got a couple of dynamics going on there, the Iran thing and then the Palestine thing, and those are big,
huge. Yeah, I don't think they can you can underscore them enough. But I think for years the Gulf, the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries have been trying to bring Israel and the Palestinians together. Saudi Arabia leads that group, and then UAE, Oman, Bahrain, those are all really key groups in it as well. And I think it's become clear over time that even though those countries were much more aligned with the Palestinians earlier on, probably, if we look at the 80s or 90s, they realized that they were not good faith negotiators. They weren't coming to the table to try to make a deal like Israel was. And Israel was always coming to the table. Israel has offered the Palestinians a state over 5 different times, and the Palestinians have walked away. It's never been enough for them, even though Israel has conceded to nearly every single one of their demands, besides things that would put the national security of Israel at complete risk that no civilized country could ever say yes to. Everything else the Israelis have offered to give them. And these Arab countries realize that now, and they're sick of it. They're tired of playing this game where, we're going to keep sending money to the Palestinians, and most of it's going to get pocketed by the Palestinian government. Meanwhile, 60% of the population is still going to live on less than $1 to $2 per day. They keep their people in abject poverty, and they're not really doing anything to fix the situation. But the amazing thing about this deal that we write about in our paper that your viewers can read on the Millennial Policy Center website is that it's all investment that's supposed to go to the private sector, to stimulating business, to investing in the Palestinian economy, to investing also in Jordan and Lebanon and Egypt. And these Gulf Arab countries are going to play a key part in providing the financing as well. And so it would really be a great thing. But unfortunately, the Palestinian leaders are opposed to it. And I believe it's because they, and a lot of other analysts I've heard too, believe it's because they see it as a threat to their power. And, it's better for them to continue to receive foreign aid from the United States, from the European Union, from the United Nations, the GCC countries. But at least the United States and the GCC are saying enough is enough. This is not the best way forward for the Palestinians. And it's really unfortunate. I think something that Jared Kushner often says that's very true is he says to the Palestinians, don't let your grandfather's conflict ruin your future. And so this is something that could really tremendously change the future of millions of Palestinians' lives. It could double their GDP. It could double job growth and lower unemployment to possible single digits. So it's really an incredible plan. And the Arab countries are saying enough is enough. And like you said as well, they're working together against Iran. They perceive Iran as a much greater threat, which they are. We remember, when Iran struck the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia not long ago, and they're constantly planning terror attacks in these Gulf Arab countries, and it's become an increasing threat for them. And so they found it better to work with Israel and to work with the United States. And so these secret, back channels have been developing over the years, and then they really started to escalate after Obama's Iran nuclear deal. And now I think we're at the point where the U.S. is actually working to build a national security architecture in the region of Israel and these Arab countries working together to contain Iran. And hopefully that architecture is also going to prevent the United States from having to deploy more of our forces and more of our resources, which is, something that not only President Trump, but other presidents have tried and been campaigning on for so long. But I think this is actually something the president will really be able to deliver on, is the more we have Israel and the Arab countries together, the less we'll need U.S. military assets there if our friends are helping us fight these battles. So,
right. I really hope that President Trump plays this up big time in his campaign, because no other president, like you said, in 26 years, it was Bill Clinton that oversaw the Jordan treaty, right? So President Obama wasn't able to do this, and President Trump has done a few things that have helped get us there. The moving the embassy to Jerusalem, right? That was a big deal, and then and taking us out of the Iran nuke deal. And those are two things, and it's the fact that none of these Gulf Arab countries stepped forward and said anything negative about moving the embassy. It says a lot. Well, and the fact that he took us out of the Iran deal, like that was one of his promises that he made to do, and he did it. Some people get so focused on all the things that they hate about the president or all the things that he's saying that it's like he gets no credit for the promises that he's keeping. And this is huge. Well, what I really loved first of all, the plan is amazing. I mean, you likened it to the Marshall Plan in the paper, and it's just so comprehensive. All I could think was it's just going to transform the Middle East and make it into this economic powerhouse. If it goes the way, it's so ambitious, but that's what it will become, an economic powerhouse over there, and bring Palestine into the 21st century and make them a force to be reckoned with in a good way. And so I really hope that we can keep going in that direction. Well, what also impressed me was the strategy, this outside-in strategy. And basically it means that in the past people have tried to get Palestine and Israel together first, and then they were going to work on the Arab countries. And so I was thinking that somebody was up at midnight going, I don't know what to do about this, and they're tired or whatever, and then they're like, hey, wait a minute. Why don't we, because there's something that's wouldn't come to you until you're like totally tired and your defenses are down, like, wait a minute, why don't we flip that? Why don't we put the Gulf countries in first, and then they can put the pressure on Palestine, and then Palestine will move forward. And I mean, isn't that kind of the idea, is if we get enough Gulf countries to line up with Israel, that Palestine basically loses the backing that it used to have and begins to feel the pressure, and it becomes isolated, and then it has to decide, does it want to do this? Does it want to walk this path alone, or does it want to capitulate and say, all right, we cannot go against Israel, the United States, and the Gulf countries who used to be our buddies,
Exactly. No, I think part of the brilliance of this strategy is, you know, President Trump and the people that he had this up, Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt, who used to be the U.S. representative for international negotiations. He played a key role in all the shuttle diplomacy. These guys came from the private sector. I mean, they worked at the Trump Organization. They did huge real estate deals. They were involved in a lot of different industries. And so they had like a businessman's mentality instead of a bureaucrat's mentality when it came to trying to resolve this conflict. And they realized we've been at a stalemate for decades, you know, and nobody's really made progress on it. I mean, the Clinton administration did make some progress on it, you know, and with the Oslo Accords, and then, you know, they helped with the Israel-Jordan peace treaty. But other than that, we haven't seen any major breakthroughs in a very long time. And, you know, Clinton, Bush, Obama, all of them tried to bring together the Israelis and the Palestinians to no avail. And because they were basically trying to force Israel to make impossible concessions, and the Palestinians just weren't willing to accept anything. And why would they, when they had so much leverage, they had so much foreign aid flowing to them? I mean, it doesn't make sense for them to give up, you know, the control that they had and make democratic reforms and whatnot. So I agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised if Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, and his team sometime in the middle of the night, while they're thinking through why did these other presidents fail, why did these other administrations come short, if it just struck them and they just said, you know what, let's take instead of an inside out approach, let's do an outside in approach. Because before it was inside out, where, okay, Israel makes peace with the Palestinians, and then all these other Arab countries are going to normalize relations. Well, they said, look, Israel and the Arab countries are already working together in so many areas. They're cooperating quietly. They have a shared threat as it relates to Iran. And that was a big priority for the administration as well, which which we already spoke about with Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. But they said, why don't we work on the outside? And they had a lot of meetings going back and forth between Israel and the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Bahrainis and the Omanis and all these different Arab Gulf countries to figure out, okay, what can people accept and how can we work together? And I think, yeah, like you said, this really is a Marshall Plan that could revolutionize the Palestinian economy, could help revolutionize Lebanon, which is in a lot of trouble right now, and Jordan and Egypt and a number of these other countries. And I think you already see the beginning of this. I mean, as soon as this peace deal was announced, immediately, for the first time in history, Israel and the United Arab Emirates opened telecommunications. They never had telecommunications before this. They always went through third parties. They immediately got on the phones, and within 48 hours, they were striking multi-billion-dollar deals. I mean, one that I was just reading about is amazing. I mean, when we talk about, you know, how rough this year has been, one of the largest investment funds in the United Arab Emirates, called the Apex Group, is going to work with one of Israel's leading healthcare companies, the Terra Group, on research and development for finding a vaccine for COVID-19. And there's going to be a lot of investment flowing into that. And that's just one example. I mean, technology, tourism, agriculture, there's going to be so many areas where they're going to be able to cooperate. So I think this is definitely a milestone that shows the success of the outside-in approach, where other administrations came far short of ever coming close to something like this. So,
and so the other Arab countries are going to see that this is happening, and they're going to say, how do I get in on that deal? Right? Because Israel's been so successful. They've got a proven track record, and so there's every motivation for other countries to get on board. What do you think? Like, who do you think is going to be the next country?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good toss-up. I think it could be, I mean, there's speculation today in the media. It could be Sudan. It could be, I think it might be Oman or Bahrain. They both have been developing relations, and, you know, we've been talking with Ambassador Sam Zakhem about it, who helped, he was Ronald Reagan's ambassador to Bahrain from 1986 to 89, and then he came back and oversaw Bush's diplomatic efforts during the Cold War. He's been an advisor to Jimmy and I on the paper. He helped contribute. There's also a video that your listeners can see on our website with Ambassador Sam Zackham, Jimmy and I talking about these issues back in December. So it's amazing to see, you know, the success of the strategy and things coming to fruition now. But he told us then, you know, I mean, obviously he can't say a lot, but he talks to the people there in the government that are talking to the Israelis and in Bahrain and working on establishing something. So hopefully this will, you know, but maybe Bahrain could be next, maybe Oman could be next. We'll see, but it's just really exciting, and the indications that we keep hearing is that something could happen before the end of the year.
So if more of these countries jump on board, and let's say the Saudi Arabia, I'm still guessing that they're going to, it may take a little bit longer, but let's say you get another 3 or 4 countries, including the big one. Do you think that's enough to motivate Palestine to go ahead and sign on to this? What was it? Peace and prosperity?
Peace, yeah. Peace to prosperity plan.
Peace to prosperity plan.
Yeah, I think it has a shot. It definitely puts more pressure on them to have to negotiate and to stop their rejectionism of rejecting every, you know, diplomatic effort and overture that Israel makes and that the Arabs have tried to make. I mean, these Gulf Arab states, they've also been trying to get the Palestinians to the table through their back channels, and they haven't been able to. And so hopefully they will, you know, come to the table. But I think definitely the more Arab countries normalize relations with Israel, the more other countries are they're going to want the benefit, because Israel has so many miracles, so many amazing things happening in its economy that can benefit these other countries, and they realize that. So I think eventually there could be this gravity that just keeps pulling more countries into it, and eventually pulls the Palestinians to the table to negotiate. But I think they will hold out as long as they can. And, you know, unfortunately, they're probably going to try to get more funding from the mullahs in Iran and from other sources that wouldn't be good. Iran is a key financier of Hamas, the terrorist group that runs Gaza. And so they definitely could turn more to them. But hopefully, you know, as the United States and hopefully our allies and hopefully eventually the international community will all join in sanctioning, putting the international sanctions back onto Iran and putting more and more pressure onto them. Hopefully they won't be able to keep funding the Palestinians, but I think they're going to hold off as long as they can. But eventually, yes, if we keep going down the trajectory that started with this deal, they will eventually have to come to the table. So.
Yeah, that's just an amazing possibility. Do you think that Iran, watching this happen, is going to start stepping up their activities, their proxy wars in these other little countries? I mean, Lebanon just had some big problems over there.
Right.
The whole government just stepped down, right?
Right.
And so you think we're going to see some more of that? Because Iran's not going to like that this is happening.
Absolutely. I mean, Iran, the government of Iran, I mean, the people of Iran are great, and they're suffering, unfortunately, under this terrible regime. You know, the government, the Shah, used to be a great friend of America and Israel, but this radical regime, they just thrive off of creating instability throughout the region. So that's why they thrived when ISIS, the caliphate, was still the size of Ohio before President Trump took office. They thrived when there was a lack of American leadership, when there was a lack of regional leadership. They were funding all these groups in Iraq and in Syria, Shia groups, and they still are, but these groups, you know, aren't as powerful now, thankfully, and hopefully that continues. But yeah, that's part of why they've thrived in financing Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has helped create more instability there. So I think Iran will just continue to try to exploit instability wherever they can. So wherever there's any political instability, wherever there's poverty, wherever there's a sense of hopelessness, which is usually where fundamentalism and terrorism thrive. Hopefully they, hopefully that will subside. But I think Iran will look for all of those places, try to exploit it as much as they can. And they're definitely very unhappy. I mean, they've made threats to the United Arab Emirates, to, His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi. They've made threats to Saudi Arabia, and we already see they attack their oil facilities. But I think one of the amazing things, and I think this would be so ironic, is Israel has the Iron Dome, which is a technology that the United States has helped in giving them as well, and developed with them, and it shoots down missiles that Hamas launches into Israel. Well, there's been reports that there's interest of the Saudis and the Emiratis to purchase the Iron Dome so that they can protect their facilities. So how ironic and amazing would it be if U.S. and Israeli military technology ends up preventing Iran from attacking these countries? But I definitely think they're going to try to, and they're probably already planning attacks on these countries, unfortunately. So
yeah, that's too bad. But they don't have enough strength. They don't have enough funds to overcome a united Gulf country Israel alliance. And then, I want to be optimistic on this because it just feels so awesome. And
yes.
So it's just wonderful. I mean, I can remember Menachem Begum. I'm old enough.
Yeah.
One lovely thing about being my age is that I can remember all the stuff that went down. I remember gas lines. I can remember a lot of stuff that I have over millennials. But anyway, it's awesome. It's just a fabulous idea to think about Gulf countries lining up, normalizing relations with Israel, working together with Israel, and then eventually Palestine capitulating and saying, okay, we'll capitulate to this great program, right? And then seeing this peace to prosperity. I mean, this is just huge. I'm going to link to that because I really want my listeners to go and read that plan. I mean, it really would transform the Middle East. And so to see, let's say all that happens, the Gulf countries line up, Palestine capitulates, this thing is put into place, it starts, down this 10-year, because it's a 10-year plan, it starts down this plan and things start happening, then Iran basically becomes sort of this little quarantined country all by itself over there with, with all these big giants, economic powerhouses now surrounding it. And a lot of its power is going to go away at that point. And so I love the idea. And then if the people could take back, actually, I'm really fantasizing now. The people could take back their country in Iran. Whoa.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and it could be one of these flip-flop deals where the Middle East is all of a sudden peaceful and democratic, and we're over here, dealing with looters.
Exactly.
Like that. Hey, Israel, come help us out. But I just love the idea of all of that falling into place, just like dominoes, just, got it set and starting to fall, because the dominoes have been set up over all this time, and President Trump has come along and been the right president at the right time to do those things that President Obama was never going to do.
Exactly.
And so, which leads us to the realism portion of the program here. So what happens if President Trump is not reelected, and heaven forbid we have a President Biden who's not going to be on board with this and may sort of take us back to a, let's work with Iran, Obama.
Right. Honestly, I mean, there's a number of different scenarios, but I think we will definitely lose a lot of the progress that's being made, a lot of the forward momentum that we feel right now of these other countries coming forward. It could be put into jeopardy. It could become less likely. I think the Israelis and the Arab Gulf countries would continue to cooperate on some level, no matter what, to contain Iran and to develop economic relations, because talk about realism. I mean, if we're talking about international relations and realism, it's in a state's best interest to do that, to consider their national security and their economic interest first. So I think they'll continue down that path to a degree, but they may not have the same strong United States that they need. And we could definitely see, God forbid, a President Biden that would try to capitulate to Iran, just like his president Obama did, and try to enter back into the Iran nuclear deal on very bad terms. And President Trump says often how much that Iran is just dying for Biden to win, because they know that the deal that they get with him will be much better than the deal that they get with President Trump. So there's a lot at stake. I mean, I think the future of this is definitely at stake. And if we want to continue to see this success and see more countries make peace with Israel and between the Israelis and the Palestinians, it becomes a lot less likely under a President Biden, which would be a weak foreign policy administration in the Middle East.
So really a President Harris, because we know that's what would happen fairly shortly, I think, after inauguration, one way or another. I have no idea what her foreign policy positions are, although I'm sure that they're probably fairly in line with a Biden-Obama. They on the left, they all tend to sort of, line up with the Palestinians and against Israel, and with Iran, which is just crazy. I'll never understand. If Iran is for your presidency, then there's got to be something wrong,
right,
with your positions.
Exactly.
That should be a red flag to you. But,
absolutely.
Well, let's hope and pray that President Trump is reelected so he can continue with this. The peace to prosperity, is this President Trump's creation? And because I'm wondering if Biden, that's pretty appropriate. If Biden is elected, is that deal just done, or?
That's a good question. I think the peace to prosperity plan, really part of the brilliance behind it, people can get a link to it in our paper, and then there's also it's on the White House website as well, the Peace to Prosperity Plan. But basically, Jared Kushner and others, Jason Greenblatt, went around and met with all these various individuals. They took all the best research studies, things that were produced by the World Bank, by the US, by the UN, by the EU, by the Quartet, by so many different groups, on projects that could be done between the Israelis and the Palestinians to try to bring about peace and to try to bring about normalization. So I think they really took the best ideas that were created by both Democrats and Republicans and people of all different backgrounds. It's just the best ideas. So you would hope that he would try to keep something like this alive and try to keep it going. But I don't know that he will. And like you said, I mean, Harris could really be the leader. I mean, who knows how a Biden presidency would go, but I think it would definitely be a weaker presidency in the Middle East. President Trump, his first trip over there, he went to Riyadh, then he went to Jerusalem, and he made very clear to the region his priorities. He said, we need to, remember at this time, like the caliphate of ISIS is still the size of Ohio and Iraq and Syria and these other countries. Now we barely even hear about it because they've just so decimated them, and the victory was so great and so swift when Obama and his generals were saying, this is going to take generations. And President Trump did it in a matter of a few years, just within his first term. So he's been very strong in that regard, with moving the embassy to Jerusalem, as you said, with recognizing Israel's right to the Golan Heights, which was very important, not only for Israel's security, but for the region's security, so that terrorists aren't moving through that territory. And so Trump just really made some very strong moves there, and we really need to keep that momentum going forward so that we can continue to see peace and to see stabilization in the region. And really, President Trump, he's had more success in Afghanistan too than any of his predecessors, and starting to bring our troops back and having ceasefires and not losing service members in a very long time. So he's really been a peacemaking president, as much as people would like to say to the contrary or not to acknowledge it. and it's peace through strength, just like Ronald Reagan talked about, and hopefully we can continue down that path. So.
Right. Well, and like you mentioned, if you can strengthen that region, especially Palestine, and have them economically invested in their own country, and if someone builds a business, they're much less likely to go out and do anything to jeopardize that business. And so it's just that this treaty or this agreement is right on when it basically focuses on, let's build the infrastructure, let's give people the ability to build their business, let's give them skills, let's give them everything they need to build up their country and their own business, their own education, everything, get them invested in their own country, and then give them all the tools they need to make a success of themselves and their country. And so when they do that, they're not going to be focusing on eradicating Israel or wiping them off the map anymore. They're going to be working with them. They're going to be trading with them. They're going to be utilizing their Israeli technology, and so they're going to be invested in keeping peace with Israel. And so for our country, that's awesome, because we are no longer having to focus on trying to help, keep Israel safe, or trying to, we won't have to send troops over there so much to deal with, anything in the Iranian, backed in the future.
Right.
So we can do everything we can to help stabilize through investment, and not just throwing money at it, but having them invest in themselves and helping them. It's basically enabling them to invest in themselves and in their own country. And so that's genius.
It is. And I just want to mention too, it's a tremendous opportunity for the business community in America too. I mean, they had, when they first unveiled this plan back in, I believe it was in Doha, with Jared Kushner and these heads of state of all these other countries that were there. This didn't get very reported in the media, but executives from some of America's top Fortune 500 companies were there, and they were exploring opportunities of how they might invest, how they might, get involved if peace were to take root. What kind of opportunities is that going to create for American companies as well? So I think really when you try to solve it through business and investing in Israeli and Palestinian entrepreneurs, Palestinian small businesses and startups, and providing them with better financial services, better healthcare, better education, just so many different areas. When you have foreign direct investment, we've seen with so many other developing countries what success that leads to. When we look at the Marshall Plan, when we look at South Korea, when we look at Singapore, when we look at Japan, I mean, so many different countries around the world have benefited tremendously from investment into the free market economy. And if we could do that, it would be great. And unfortunately, I think the greatest threat, it was really underscored by a meeting that I was blessed to get to go to at the White House with also Jeff Hunt, who's the director of the Centennial Institute, with Jason Greenblatt back earlier on in this plan. And Jason Greenblatt just really underscored that he goes around, he meets with a lot of the Israeli and Palestinian youth, people in the business community, other leaders, and they all want peace. They're tired of the conflict. They want the integration, but the unfortunate reality is that the Palestinian government is doing all that they can to hold on to power, and they push this propaganda that this is bad and that, it's going to be a bad deal for the Palestinians. But the administration has been saying, look, like, not from a political perspective or anything, this is great for humanity. This is great for your people. This has the potential to uplift millions of your people out of poverty, to slash unemployment to single digits, to see leaps and bounds in the GDP and so many other parts of the Palestinian economy. But unfortunately, that's been the main roadblock. But hopefully the momentum just keeps going this direction, and eventually the people will just demand change, and hopefully the investment will just be able to reach the people who need it the most. So.
Well, I hope so. I think the UAE agreement is the first domino, and I'm going to be watching for the next ones to fall. And hopefully as they start falling, Trump is reelected and they can continue to fall, and then we can have this peace to prosperity plan. The Palestinians will go along with it, and then we're off and running. So
yes,
people cannot argue that Trump has not been successful, because this is huge. This is huge. So I'm praying. I'm literally going to be praying that another country signs on soon, and that we can get Trump reelected, if for no other reason. Peace, Middle East. Come on.
right.
Enormous.
Right.
It's fabulous. It's huge. So, well, thank you so much, Samuel Lourie, for coming on.
You.
And I will be posting the link to this paper at the Millennial Institute and Millennial Policy Center. Sorry, you're with the Centennial Institute, but I'm going to be posting the paper that you wrote with Jimmy Sangenberger.
You got it.
Wrong.
Sangenberger.
That you wrote together at the Millennial Policy Center. I'm going to post it on the show notes so people can read this. Also, I will link to that video interview you were telling me about with the ambassador, whose name
Please, Sam Zackham. Sam Zackham.
Sam Zackham. Yeah. Because that's a good one too. I love him. He's great. I just love that he has some great turns of phrases that he uses.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you again for joining me. If another country joins soon, I may have to have you back on so we can talk about the next domino that is just on. So, and maybe it'll be close to the election and things will start, looking good. So.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. It's lovely you have this good news within 2020, and it's nice. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise with us, and everything you do. It's just great. The paper's great. You're doing a lot of great work. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Annette. No, I really appreciate you having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you. And thank you so much. I'm just wish you and your show and your viewers all the best. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. All right. You can find this show, Annette, on Life, Liberty, and Happiness at AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube.com/Annette Talks. Please go there, like, subscribe, share, comment, all the usual stuff.